Hi, we are Jens, Max and Lucas, and we would love to give you a quick introduction to what we hope to discuss with you in our unconference at SIPS on standardization practices in psychology. With standardization, a somewhat ambiguous term, we refer to statistical kinds of standardization. Let's walk through a brief example. Imagine that we are looking to evaluate the effect that a statistical literacy training has. This is measured using some exam-style measurement, resulting in a single literacy score for each participant. Now, typically, we would want to compare two groups, one where the training was administered and a control group. The easiest way to do so would be to look at the difference in means of the two groups. Kind of using our most basic hypothesis test. However, a simple difference in means might not really inform us about the strength of the treatment's effect in relation to the spread of scores. Therefore, often we standardize this difference in means. Most of us know Cohen's d as a way of standardizing a mean difference. We simply divide this mean difference by the pooled standard deviation. Further, Jacob Cohen also was so kind to provide us with, by now well-known guidelines for the interpretation. However, now imagine we are performing a meta-analysis across a couple of such studies to get a better understanding of the real effect size or the generalizability of the effect. In such a meta-analysis, typically we would get a weighted estimate of the underlying effect size. And additionally, we receive an estimate of how much this effect might vary, in how far it is heterogeneous. Typically, we would use a random effects model to assess our standardized mean differences. The meta-analysis should therefore inform us on the underlying effect size and how strongly this effect varies across studies. Here, we are looking at our statistical literacy example, where we have two separate populations of scores, one for the people who have received our training and one for the control group. From these populations, the two densities up top, we can draw a number of samples, the histograms down here, and evaluate their standardized mean differences. However, imagine in a parallel universe, we used a selective sampling scheme, which makes it impossible to draw people from the more extreme ends of the populations. Thereby, we obtained a number of studies from the same population, but drew less representative samples. The sample's standard deviations are simply too small. Now, you could imagine that something like this, with some restrictions, could happen if we sample specific subpopulations, for example, using social media or approaching people in public places. In this parallel universe, the mean differences across samples may be the same as in the other universe, but with the small standard deviations, our standardized effects would be overestimated, which has a number of implications for our meta-analysis and likely the estimation of effect heterogeneity. And since our hypotheses and intuition actually deal with the differences in means, the standardization practice clearly has given us a distorted picture of what we were actually interested in. Besides the obvious impact on our estimated effect size, this might also affect estimates of heterogeneity, power analyses, or even hypothesis tests. Well, if any of this sounds interesting to you, we would love to welcome you to our open discussion on such topics. Our initial goals would include to brainstorm and identify similar relevant standardization procedures and their implications in inference and research synthesis. Also, we would love to weigh the pros and cons of such practices, as there might be limitations to them, but clearly there's also some necessity to them as well. Additionally, we would love to discuss potential alternatives to the current standardization practice and see whether we together can come to ideas that might carry less but likely other issues. Initially, we would like to structure the unconference as follows. First, who are we? Second, recap what do we mean by standardization? Third, brainstorm and identify with pros and cons of standardization procedures, then alternatives, and lastly, look at potential future plans. But clearly, everything is very open, and we are looking forward to your ideas and discussion topics. So, we are looking forward to see you at SIPS at Friday, 23rd of June at 11:30 in room 1A.